Hi, everyone. I'm Hanobi Schoonover, the Training and Resource Coordinator of Redwind Consulting, and I'd like to welcome you to the webinar. Before we begin, for those who may not know, Redwind is a nonprofit organization that provides tribal technical assistance on a variety of programs, including but not limited to housing and homeless services, children and youth, and elder abuse. This ranges from policy review via email to site visits. If you're interested, you can contact me at the email I am putting into the chat box. That is honovi@red-wind.net. So before I introduce our presenters, if anyone has any questions throughout the presentation, you can put them into the chat box. I will be looking periodically to see if anyone has any questions or comments, and I will let our presenters know at the appropriate time. And if anyone has any difficulty seeing the slides, you can move the presenter boxes around the screen, depending on where the chat boxes are for you. And now I will get to introducing our presenters. So joining us today are Zoe LeBeau, Robin Thorne, Victoria Ybanez, and Wyanet Tasker. Zoe LeBeau is the CEO of Beau Simone Consulting, a woman-owned small business that specializes in assisting communities, developing and managing high-quality supportive housing. She brings over 25 years of hands-on and direct experience in all aspects of housing, service development, and implementation. And in her 25-year career, she has worked with over 2,000 units of housing that range from transitional, permanent supportive, multi-family, affordable, and homeownership. Robin Thorne, who is the Vice President of RT Hawk Housing Alliance and is the Training and Asset Management, has been working with tribal clients in developing and managing their affordable housing projects since 2003. She works directly with Tribal Housing Authority staff to ensure compliance with NAHASDA, AHP, and other affordable housing program requirements. Victoria Ybanez is the Executive Director of Redwind Consulting and has been since 2005, and has been working to end violence against American Indian and Alaskan Native women for 35 years. She has a depth of experience working closely with tribes and developing and implementing a range of responses to violence against Indigenous women, and has conducted numerous site visits, facilitated sessions, and trainings for tribes over the past 20 years. Finally, Wyanet Tasker is Redwind's Housing and Homeless Services Tribal Technical Assistance Coordinator and was previously the Children and Youth Tribal TA Coordinator, and has been working with survivors of trauma since 2005. She has direct service experience in a residential treatment facility, school setting, shelter, and housing program. She has been providing culturally specific training and TA since 2015 and has developed expertise with special survivor populations such as children and youth, male survivors, Two-Spirit and LGBTQ+, and survivors with disability. And I will now turn it over to our presenters.
Next slide, please.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think we're going to just do a little personal introduction to add to the previous. So hi, everyone. My name is Zoe LeBeau. I think that you heard a lot about the organization I work for. What I want to share is that have been working specifically with tribes and urban Indian organizations for about the last 15 years. And have never in my lifetime seen these kinds of resources, both that are going to be coming to tribal communities, but also to cities, states, and counties that can be used for this type of housing for survivors. And so it's very exciting, and it's also very anxiety producing because I don't want to see one dime of this money go back to the federal government. And so Just really excited to have you all here. Also, full disclaimer, I do not work for the federal government, so we're all just trying to figure out how this money can be used. So what I'm really going to focus on today is just talking about what's available, what it can be used for that's relevant to the survivor population, and where you can access it. And knowing that you all are service providers and this housing development is not your world, and we don't want it to be, what we want to do is help you figure out how to be really good advocates to get this money that's going to be coming into your community to support survivors of domestic and sexual violence. Thank you.
Oops, sorry. No, I'm not muted. I'll start again. Hi, everyone. My name is Robin Thorne, and as it said in my bio, I currently work with RT Hawk Housing Alliance. We are 100% Indian-owned company. Our owner, Wilbur Red Tomahawk, is from the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, and that is where our company is based. I've been working in housing, just tribal housing, affordable housing, and also supportive housing projects with Zoe and other more specific housing groups for the last 18 years. And the same topics that Zoe just mentioned, I'm going to reinforce, and we'll probably be reinforcing it throughout the presentation today, is that we are in a rare place in history right now where there are sums of money that we will probably not see again in our careers. So we want to make sure that we give you an overview of what's out there so that you know what might be possible going forward, and to also be aware that there will be windows that we need to make sure we get through so that we don't lose the opportunity to maximize the benefits of these funding sources.
Hi, everybody. It's really great to be here. I'm Victoria Ybanez, as Hanovi had mentioned. And
oh my gosh. So are they going to do second interviews?
Paula, you're not muted right now, just an FYI. And so I just wanted to just welcome everybody and just to let you all know a little bit more about me.
The next one is what committee?
I have been working on domestic and sexual violence for about 36 years now. And years ago, I actually was a housing developer when I was the director of American Indian Community Housing. And I think we're in a really unique opportunity to do some really solid systems advocacy to have a significant impact to fill this huge void that we have going on in our tribal communities, to be able to meet the needs of survivors of domestic and sexual violence and sex trafficking at this point in time.
Hey everyone, I'm Wyanet Tasker. Over the past year of COVID, I've been working a lot with tribal advocates who may have been more interested in like shelter development in their communities. But after COVID hit, it became such a huge shift of we need less communal spaces. We need 6 feet of social distancing. How do we work in more transitional housing projects or things like that? So I'm really excited, and I'm really excited that you're all here because there's never enough affordable housing, and we all know that. So this is, I like to see this as the silver lining of COVID. The one good thing to happen from COVID is this huge opportunity. And so we're here to help advocate for more affordable housing for survivors, and we're really glad you're here.
Next slide. So I just wanted to share a little bit of information. So when we think about the work that we're sharing with you today, is that we're coming from a systems advocacy approach. And the reason that we're doing it is because we have dire needs. And what we know through a report through the National Institute of Justice is that most American Indian and Alaska Native adults are victims of violence. And what we know out of that is that 84.3% have experienced violence in their lifetime as women, and then as men, 81.6%, which is stark. It's huge to know that we have that level of violence. And just to bring some data to show you about the impact of domestic violence and homelessness is quite significant. And I've been working over a lot of the years, over the time I've been working in this field, have been working around housing and homelessness with victims and sexual violence and domestic violence survivors. And so when we look at that, 50% of the women who are homeless report that domestic violence was the immediate cause of their homelessness. And also with that, while this talks about adult people, that we also have to remember that this oftentimes is a household that is homeless. So 50% of women who are homeless report that it was caused by domestic violence. And with that are her children that are homeless as well. 84% of homeless women have experienced severe physical or sexual abuse at some point in their lives. And in the context of thinking about homelessness is that we know that when survivors do not have safe housing options, that there's higher risks for potential lethality for them and the ranges of violence that they experience at the hands of the abusers that have made these hard impacts on their lives. Next slide. So when we think about what we're doing as advocates, as a part of this work, so as you heard just a few minutes ago, that this is really an opportunity in a lifetime to have these kinds of resources coming in place, that we have an opportunity to do systems advocates within our tribe to speak up on behalf of victims, to be able to educate our tribal leadership as well as our tribal housing authorities about the needs for housing. And in that, so in here I have a definition of what systems advocacy is that came from some work out of Duluth, Minnesota back in the, I want to say that before the turn of the century. That makes me feel ancient. Back in 1999. And that was when we talked about systems advocacy back in those days, we were talking about it in the context of a coordinated community response. And what systems advocates do is that we're working to make changes within the response and the resources that are available to make sure that the needs and safety are provided for to ensure that victims and survivors of domestic and sexual violence and sex trafficking, stalking and dating violence all have what they need to live a life that's free from violence. So when we think about systems advocacy for housing, we're really making sure that there's safe, affordable housing options for victims and survivors to flee from that violence and to stabilize their life and their household, which means including their children in the aftermath of that violence. And as a systems advocate, we're providing a voice for the housing needs of victims. So for me, when I think about it, is that we have this range of needs. It comes from the emergency shelter response in the fleeing that moves through all of the different options for housing into long-term permanent housing options. And because of the populations that we work with, survivors are carrying lots of different kinds of trauma that come from the domestic violence and living with an abuser over a long period of time, as well as survivors of sexual violence who experience violence, maybe from this current incident of being sexually assaulted, as well as maybe prior histories of violence that they've experienced as well. So the types of services and the supports that our survivors need are significant, and core to that is we can't do this work effectively with survivors unless they have a safe home to live in. And always remembering that while we may be working with single individuals, we have a much larger population that have children that are with them, that are carrying trauma as a result of living in a household where this violence occurred, or the trauma of being displaced and having unstable housing. Next slide, please.
Okay, so this is Zoe again. I'm going to talk about, so we're kind of breaking this presentation up into 2 or 3 places, but I'm going to talk about the new money that is either out or is coming out from the recently passed American Recovery Act funding that was just passed, that is basically was the latest COVID stimulus relief package. And we're going to talk about this in the context, again, recognizing that your service providers, please don't get anxious, because this is a lot of housing lingo and all kinds of stuff. What we're really going to focus on is how much money is available, where do you, what it can be used for, where do you access it is the most important. So we're not asking you to start being housing developers, but we're saying that when you go to your tribal housing authority and they say no because they are overstretched in resources, that answer is no longer relevant for the most part. That there is all this money available. Every tribe, of course, is getting a different amount based on size, but there are resources. The second part of this funding presentation, we're going to talk about existing resources, because the other reality is there is money, and there has been for a long time and will continue to be once this money is spent, money to do housing that is accessible and survivors are an eligible population for. So Robin's going to talk about that, but I'm going to just walk through these. Slide, please. Slide, please. Thank you. So the first kind of pot of money I'm going to talk about is money that is coming through Treasury. And it's $200 billion that's going directly to tribal governments, which is twice as much as last year. So if your tribe got $8 million last year, they're getting $16 million this year. Tribal government obviously controls how this money can be spent, but it can transfer funds to nonprofit or tribal organizations. That's you. And the deadline, so this is money that has to be spent fast. It has to be spent by costs incurred by December 31st. What's relevant to you is this last bullet point. It is very broad money. So we're going to show you an example later of where we use this Treasury money last year to build a permanent supportive, to buy and rehab a permanent supportive housing from the for the Salish Kootenai with the Salish Kootenai tribe. And so the important thing to know is that there's a lot of money. It's super flexible. You always want to run everything through legal, of course, but this is money that you could use tomorrow. If your tribal government said, yes, please, we want to do this. You could use this to go buy an empty apartment building, an office building, a motel, and convert it to emergency or supportive or transitional housing for survivors. Slide, please. Back one more. So there is also the Housing Assistance and Supportive Service Program for Native Americans.
My apologies, there seems to be a little tech issues.
Runaway slides. And in the chat box, I got a question, 200 billion or 20 billion? Well, I could have said that wrong, but we'll double check that. Actually, Robin, if you can look that up, maybe I just forgot a zero while I'm going through this. Okay, so next slide, please. So Housing Assistance and Support Service for Native Americans. So 750 million to remain available until September 30th, 2021 to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus activities. So this is funding that is going to go, 450 million is going to go to each tribal housing authority or tribal housing department based on their current allocation of NAHASDA, which some of you might be aware of. That's the block grant money that tribal housing departments or authorities get. They're going to get approximately almost twice as much as they normally get. And that money you can use to do just about anything with. So that money could be used to build housing for survivors. It could be used to provide rental subsidy for survivors out in the community. It could be used to provide some support services for survivors. So that's really important to know that your housing authority has almost twice as much as they get on their traditional block grant. Also 5 million for Native Hawaiian Block grants, and then 280 million in a competitive grant, Indian Community Development Block Grant. So that is competitive money that your tribe could apply for to build a shelter for survivors, to build housing for survivors, to build a community, even an office that is going to have services for survivors. Super, super, super. All of these funds are very flexible and can be used to provide housing and services for survivors. And there's no deadline. It's available until expended. Okay, slide. Okay, so Bureau of Indian Affairs, I'm less familiar with this funding, but it looks like 900 million to remain available until expended, of which 100 million shall be used for tribal housing improvement, and 772 million shall be used for tribal government services, public safety, social services, child welfare assistance, and other related expenses. So in my mind, this looks like funding that will also go to each tribe. And they will get to determine exactly what to spend it for. And so for you to be able to go in the council and say, I know this money is available and we need this for our domestic violence program or a survivor program. And it looks to me like it's fairly flexible. I'm sure there's some strings attached, but could use it for child welfare assistance, anything that's related to services for survivors. So the key again is to give you this information so you can use it to advocate to your tribal council and or your tribal housing department for victims and survivors of domestic and sexual violence. Slide. So this is Indian Health Service funding. I just pulled this one bullet point out. So it looks like Indian Health Service is getting 420 million for mental and behavioral health prevention and treatment services. Again, whether or not this can go directly to your organization, for you to know that that money, that IHS has 420 million more dollars, and that means that they should be able to provide more services for your population, whether that be providing a mental health or behavioral health staff that you have direct access to for your clients, or maybe some of it can pass directly through to you. Just to know that as you're talking to the council, that you also are aware that that money is available, and how can you get additional mental and behavioral health prevention and treatment services for survivors. And then specifically, they call out 18 million in additional funding under the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act. Not going to go into this because Vicki and her staff are well versed in this. So she can talk to you offline about it, but it is important to know there's additional money out there for that. Slide, please. Okay, so that was when I read through some of the CARES Act, or sorry, American Rescue Plan Act funding. Those were the relevant. There's a ton more stuff in there. That was what I pulled out as relevant, that tribes were going to be getting, that I thought survivors should be advocating for survivors. There's also a ton of money that states, counties, and non-tribal housing authorities and cities are getting, that I pulled out, again, some relevant. This is funding that your tribe, your housing authority should be able to access over and above what they're getting, or you as a nonprofit or a tribal department could potentially access, or even if just your survivors access, right? So we always, part of our philosophy is always like, get money from the states, the counties, the cities first if you can, and then go to the tribe and housing authority. We want you to do both in this case because both are getting a lot of resources. So slide, please. So this is a huge deal. So non-tribal public housing authorities, and just real quick, what I mean by that, you can just do a Google search, whatever community you're in, you can Google local housing authority or local public housing authority, and there should be a housing authority that's close enough to your community that they have some you in their service area, the tribe in their service area. They are getting $5 billion, and this is again scattered all around the country, for emergency rental assistance vouchers. When we say emergency, I mean, it's not just for short term, it's for, I think you can use them for up to 2 years or maybe even longer. Anyway, I won't get into that, but this is the important thing to note. The only people that qualify for those emergency vouchers are people who are homeless, at risk of homeless, fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking. So this is a huge deal. So you could have a survivor, a client who finds an apartment in the community next to the reservation, or an apartment on the reservation, and they can't afford the rent. You can go to that local non-tribal public housing authority, and they should have some of these vouchers. Depending on where you have, there's going to be different amounts. And they need to have a priority for your client if they are fleeing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking. That's a huge deal. This is a huge piece of information for you to have. They should not be able to tell you no, because this is new money. It's just coming. I don't even know if it's out yet. So for you to figure out who is that public housing authority in the community surrounding us that we might be able to access this, and get in front of them right now, because you know everybody else who lives in that community who works with those populations is getting in front of them and saying, how do our folks get these? So for you to take this information and to get yourself at the head of the queue for your clients would be important. Okay, slide please. Emergency rental assistance. So again, tribes also are getting this emergency rental assistance money, but just so you know that your state and your counties are getting them too. And this is money that can be used for just like what it sounds. So if you have somebody that is, because of COVID, because of domestic violence, and they can't go back, or for whatever reason, there is shorter term emergency rental assistance for the length of COVID. From the tribal housing entity will get some of this money, but your state, county, or local, the city that's nearby also gets it. So I would go to the tribe first for this one, because they're going to be faster than these other folks, but it's still there. Slide, please. So again, state, counties, and cities are getting $5 billion for homeless assistance and supportive housing. It can be used to provide rental assistance, like we talked about. So here's another pot of rental assistance that your folks could have access to develop affordable housing, which survivors would be a fit for, provide supportive services, and you can also acquire and develop non-congregate sheltered units. So again, you could buy a hotel and you could say, this is going to be emergency shelter for our DV survivors during COVID. And then after COVID is over, you can essentially take that and turn it into permanent supportive or some kind of other affordable housing. Okay, slide please. Okay, so this is just our example. So Morningstar Apartments is, again, Confederated Salish Kootenai tribe in Montana. Both Robin and I's group, we were the consultants on this project. They had dedicated, the tribe had dedicated a huge chunk of their Treasury Act money to doing permanent supportive housing, because they realized their homeless population was the most vulnerable to COVID and the hardest to house, and couldn't be housed in sort of traditional tribal housing because of their criminal backgrounds, because of their big behaviors associated with their trauma. And so, slide please. So, so just overview. So we bought and rehabbed an old hotel, 14 units of permanent supportive housing, plus one on-site caretaker unit, a staff office, another service space for lease up and mental health and probation, and a laundry room. Focuses on people who are on this particular project who are homeless and have been or leaving incarceration, but it could be domestic violence victims, survivors, sexual violence would be a population that completely would be eligible for this. Services on site, the Salish Kootenai Housing Authority is providing some rental assistance essentially so that the units are subsidized. In this case, the Tribal Public Defender's Office is hiring a full-time case manager and a caretaker to be the service provider. In your case, you would be the service provider. You'd be partnering with the housing authority. The housing authority would do the housing. You would do the service provision. Slide, please. So the team, so the tribe itself in this case is the owner. The Salish Kootenai Housing Authority is administering the rental assistance. The Tribal Public Defender's Office is going to be the service provider. So that would be you. You would be in that third box. And then we brought in an outside property management company. Slide, please. You don't need to, we can go past that one. You'll all get this, so you can just see who the contractors were. Here's some pictures. It was really bad, really beat up, really gross. I can't believe people stayed there because they didn't have a choice. It was pretty much a gut rehab, and it's quite beautiful now. We did it in 4 months too, by the way. I do not recommend that. Please don't wait till the end, but we were on a time crunch. Slide, please. So I think just to touch quick, this was a $1.8 million. That's pretty inexpensive, honestly, for what we got out of this building. And that included everything: acquisition, rehab, appraise, all the different fees, housing, and the consultants. So Robin's group and my group to come in and work with them to do this was included in that 1.8 million. And we totally furnished it and bought 1 million supplies, so that people literally moved in, dishes, coffee pots, linens, towels, everything you could possibly need, because we know for survivors, they're fleeing, right? And they oftentimes can't bring anything but the clothes on their back. So you can use this money to fully furnish these units. Slide, please. I'm not going to read through these because I want to give Robin some time, but just so you know, we created all these documents to make this project work. This Salish Kootenai Tribal Council has given permission to their staff and to us to share any of these with any tribe who wants to do this, so that you don't have to redo it from scratch. So we can put together, and anybody who's interested, we can get all this stuff to Red Wind, and they have been really generous about sharing. Slide, please. Jody Perez, who I wish was here because I want to give her all the credit in the world for this project. She's been amazing. She wanted me to make sure, she couldn't be here today, she wanted me to make sure that we talked about that this wouldn't have happened unless the council and the tribe had really said, we're going to put together a task force focused on this, and we're going to make it a priority. So again, your focus is more on survivors, most of whom are probably experiencing some level of homelessness, but to have all these departments participate was key. And slide, please. Just a picture of the team. Slide, please. Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Robin, and we're going to try and leave some time for questions.
Hi, everyone. Zoe's done a great job reviewing all the different new funding resources that you will have access to for the types of programs that you currently work within and that you may want to expand. It's also important to remember that those funding sources can be combined with existing funding sources to leverage those sources, so you have even more money to work with depending on what type of program it is you have on your wish list. Zoe touched on a few of these. The Indian Housing Block Grant, again, it's been increased by $750 million for the next fiscal year. It's going to be divided out pretty much in accordance with the housing block grant formula. So every tribe is going to get an increase. The ICDBG, which has a lot of opportunities as far as development and some service providing. The Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program, which is a great project program. We've worked with it, Zoe's worked with it, and it's a great way to leverage dollars you have for projects you may have in mind. The Affordable Housing Program through the Federal Home Loan Bank. The home program is an important one to remember because they're getting a $5 billion boost this year, as are the Housing Trust Fund programs, which are going to be administered individually by the states, but they're all getting really big boosts from the American Rescue Plan Act. And then, of course, after all of those resources, which are either grants or private equity, which means they are not debt, there is the Title VI loan program, which also has resources that you can utilize, and you can utilize some of the funds that are available under the American Rescue Plan so that you can perhaps pay down or utilize it as initial deposits for a possible Title VI loan. Next slide, please. So if we look at some of these funding sources, and again, we all recognize that your focus is on the service providers aspect of what you do for survivors. However, it's also important for you because you are the basis of the information for what the needs in your population are. You know how to identify what do you currently have that works and what would be great if I just had, and then you fill in the blank. No one can provide those answers as well as you as the service providers can. The next step in that is when people tell you, well, we just don't have the money for that. At this time, and I know we said this at the beginning, but I'm going to say it again. At this time in our world, there are funds for just about anything you can think of for your programs. From building something, from buying and rehabbing an existing building, like what the example that Zoe just provided you from the CARES Act money that we utilized on a really quick turnaround project. I don't want to say the sky's the limit, but I'm going to say the sky is closer than it usually is for all of us when we're looking at planning projects and trying to figure out how to provide services. So the first step, I think, is to look at what you believe you need, and then you'll be able to identify funding sources, not just for operations, but also, if necessary, for building, for long-term management, and for short-term emergency response. All this money is there. It's all about taking a plan, figuring out what it is that your priorities are, and then working with these funding sources. And it's all summarized here on this slide. I also expect, just so everyone knows, that we are going to see Congress pass more funding and spending bills that are going to be related to the services that we all provide. Additional money for homelessness, additional money for infrastructure development, which I know it seems far away from services, but infrastructure for a lot of the tribes we work with, there'll be money there so that if you need to build something, you won't have to overcome the first obstacle with raw land, which is infrastructure. So really basically ask yourselves, what is it you need? And then see which of the programs might best benefit you. My bet is it will be a combination of all of them, but there's so much money available for out there for all of us right now. It's important not to be afraid to ask the right questions. Is there money for, again, fill in the blank? Someone will know the answer, I promise. Next slide. And I think now I'm going to turn it back over to Wyanet.
Thank you, both Zoe and Robin. Everyone, feel free to chat in any questions that you have. I am putting in the chat box right now the registration link for tomorrow's Q&A session. You might not think of questions right off the top of your head right now because this is a lot to absorb. So, let things roll around in your mind overnight and check out our Q&A tomorrow, where we'll have, everyone can turn their cameras on and you can chat with all of us and listen to other people's questions too. And that might help you think through your questions.
Wyanet,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I forgot. Zoe asked me to look up the question earlier. Zoe answered it in the chat room. It was 20 billion. So I forgot to mention that when I was speaking earlier.
Thank you.
I was sad. I was hoping I was wrong, although I was starting to get even more anxiety. But hey, can I say two things?
Yeah.
One, I have to give a call out to my friends Alice and Brenda John from Wise Women Gathering Place on the call because they are working on, they implemented and are working on a whole spectrum of different emergency and we're working on a permanent supportive housing project. And I think not that I don't want to volunteer them for anything, but I think they're very generous with their information and experience. And I think their models, I'm learning a ton from some of the models that I'd never even heard of or worked on. Oh, and Beverly's on too. So anyway, I just needed to give a call out to that. And then I did want to say, Vicki, is it okay if I talk about the HUD TA? Okay.
Yes, please.
So I just also wanted to say, HUD, which is the Housing and Urban Development, which funds tribes for their housing activities, has technical assistance available, funding for technical assistance. So if you go talk to your housing authority or the tribe, it could be either the tribe or the housing authority that applies, and they say, okay, we get it, we want to use some of this money to build transitional or permanent supportive or whatever it might be for survivors, and they're saying, but we need help because this is not something we do every day. Not only can you apply for technical assistance on the services side through Redwin, but your housing authority can apply to HUD for technical assistance on the housing end. So again, we're trying to give you every angle here. So if you hear the excuse, we don't have the money, that's not right now. The money is there right now for every tribe, again, depending on how small you are, but the money is there. And if the second reason they can't do it is because they don't know how, the technical assistance funding is there through HUD. So they need to do a technical assistance request stating the kind of housing they want to do, and it goes to their local HUD person and works its way up through the system, and they will have somebody, a technical assistance provider, assigned to help do this.
Thank you, Zoe. And really, for all of the technical assistance that you would be interested in, it's really individualized. It's going to be whatever you need. We're here to help you become strong advocates so you can advocate for your victims' needs. While your tribal leadership and tribal housing authorities are going to make a lot of those ultimate decisions, we here at Redwind are here to strategize around that system level advocacy. So again, it's a really, really good time to ask for things that you've been told no about earlier. We can help you think through things like short-term and long-term responses during this time. Things around like COVID immediacy. So things like the social distancing, how you're going to handle that, whether that's through social distanced shelters, or if it's through rental assistance, or if it's through transitional housing or relocation projects, or like long-term strategies. So how are you meeting the needs for your special populations in your communities, the LGBT two-spirit population, your men survivors, elder survivors, different groups that don't tend to get the programming and the education in the community that is needed. This feels really huge, and it's a lot of money, and it's really a great opportunity. But you do have a team here to help you. So help is here. And I would say don't think so much about the money because we're advocates. Think about wishes and your ideals. And that's a huge piece because one of the biggest challenges here is going to be spending all of that money, getting those ideas to spend that money down. So, go ahead.
So looks like we have a little time. So can we just start chatting a little bit?
Yeah.
With folks? And I'm going to do a little freestyle and training here, or talking, if that's okay. No, I think that's a really important point, Wyanet. And I do want to say, as somebody who typically works with the housing authorities, first of all, I need to give them all the credit in the world because they are trying to do so much with so little. And so, we kind of joking a little bit about saying they can't say no right now, but to be fair, like the reason they had to say no before is because there really just wasn't the resources, and there won't be in every case any now either. But I will say that the biggest challenge I have in my work with housing authorities is we can't find service providers. So we always want to work as a team, especially when we're doing these supportive service housing projects, which is what I do. And really, we struggle a lot with trying to get a service provider from the tribe who says, I really want to do this. And so this is super exciting for me because I think I would love to even get a list, or if that's possible at some point, of who is on this call, because I'm willing to bet we're probably working with some of your communities and are probably struggling, and just, we don't know that each other exists at this point, right? So, or aren't used to working together, or whatever it might be. So I think this is really an exciting time. And I really think if you approach some of your housing authorities at this time, I feel like they'd be excited about this, because that's the piece they're missing. They can build these buildings, and then move these special populations in, and then but they're not service providers. So I just want to just encourage you and tell you from my angle, I think this is super exciting, and they would be excited to hear from you.
I also just put a link to our web form into the chat. You can reach out to all of us, but we also have this web form link for you to link into TA. As an example, it might start with like a phone call with Redwind, and we can help you brainstorm things like what do survivors need and want, who would you need to talk to in your community, what kind of data might you be looking for to support your ideas. And then we can pull in other expertise as we go along for whoever you need along the process. We've also started creating resources. So like we have a new resource that's been approved, and we can send this out with the slides and with the recording as a follow-up. And it has things in there like model housing options and how they link to survivor needs, or a system level advocacy prep checklist. So that's in there. And then kind of once you've worked through those ideas, and you can think about what ways you might want to get tribal leadership the information that they need, or what might they need to know about survivors in your community. So this resource also has some guidance on engaging with tribal leadership. So we can send that out to you. You really, really don't have to know it all. This is a lot of information. The goal is going to be, figuring out who you need to talk to, who do you need to partner with, who has their knowledge bases that you can tap into. That saying of two heads are better than one. No one's brain can hold all of the info that you would ever need. So we know that advocates are not housing developers. So you can stay in your lane. It's a good thing to advocate for people. This is like this level of advocacy that you can reach into, and it might be uncomfortable at first, and that's what we're here for too. So think about what your survivors need, and then we're here to help with that brainstorming and moving the process forward. So Alice, on this slide, we do have contact information, but I'm going to go ahead and put my email into the chat too. And you can start with me, and then if your tribal housing authority needs to figure out who they need to talk to, we could pull in like so, or as we go along the process, we can figure out who else you might need to talk to, or your housing authority needs to talk to, those kind of things.
I would love to hear, I know it's so awkward in these Zoom setups, but is anybody's brain already whirring with ideas? I know we did set up the Q&A tomorrow on purpose to try and give everyone a chance to let a little bit of this sink in, but would just love if anybody wants to share or shout out. It looks like Yolanda said yes, she's got some ideas perhaps already. That's great.
I had a kind of a weird question. I think tribal citizens, as they're sort of are fleeing domestic violence from the reservation, a lot of times they sort of end up in urban centers as a part of that process. So I guess, do you have any advice in terms of empowering like service providers in the cities that are focusing on an urban indigenous population to support the tribal citizens fleeing from the reservation? Like, how do you have that communication and connection between tribes and then city organizations?
I can respond to that. So one of our TA areas is really, one part of it is to work on providing TA for responses for urban natives. So we're working with culturally based native organizations in urban areas, as well as other non-native programs that are serving large populations. And Zoe and Robin shared information about some of the resources coming to the states and the local areas as well. And so we can also help you do some work to think through some strategies to make your asks there within your urban area as well.
I just wanted to respond. So Maggie talked about potentially that they're interested in purchasing an apartment building in town because there's nothing on the reservation. But the problem they're running into is future taxes and not seeing something that the tribe would approve. I wonder, and maybe Robin remembers a little bit more, but with Salish Kootenai, the building they bought was on the reservation, but it was not on trust land. So they are having to pay taxes, but they're in the process of putting it into trust. So their kind of thought was that, okay, we'll bite the bullet for the first year or two while we work through getting into trust. Is that correct, Robin? Did I say that correctly?
Yes, and while they're waiting for it to go into trust, they were also going to at least reach out to the local taxing authorities and try to enter into a pilot agreement so that they would have at least reduced or no taxes while they wait to see if they can have the land moved into trust.
Yeah. So it's not ideal, but at least it's there's some precedent for another tribe doing it that way. Yolanda asked who hires the developer contractor. So that would be your housing authority. So again, this is a partnership where you're going to the housing authority and saying, hey, these resources are available. We have the population who needs housing. And then they would work to hire somebody like Robin's group or whoever, who is a developer and contract, or then they oversee the contractor. So that would not be your responsibility. Deep breath, because I always think when I talk to service providers, and I remember being a service provider and people talking to me about development and the panic, I would like, that's not what I do. But no, that would be something your housing authority. Although I will say, and Vicki can, I think, speak to this. I know she can, but that if your tribe or your housing authority says, you know what, this is just not something for whatever reason, this is not something that we're interested in doing. There are opportunities and there is precedent for partnering with a non-tribal developer, maybe, and actually we're working with a native owned construction company to see if they will take on becoming a tribally owned developer exactly for this situation. But there are developers who have done these with tribes before who could be a potential partnership so that, you know, you don't have to do it, but you're still this, I mean, well, is Alice still, I don't, that's pretty much what Wise Women is doing right now. I don't want to speak out of turn, but is really partnering with a non-tribal housing authority developer to do this. So that is a possibility as well.
And I just want to add, so years ago when I was the director of American Indian Community Housing Organization, our role was to provide services to victims. And we did that through both transitional housing and emergency shelter. And we ended up becoming a CDC, Community Development Corporation. And so me as a director who basically had a background in advocacy, what I learned from that entire process and the development work that we did was you need to know people who know stuff. And so like I knew the whole service stuff, and then through other connections had the ability to pull together the resources. And so I think that's the critical piece in here when we think about like the systems advocacy approach, is that you don't need to know everything. You just need to know enough to ask the right questions, to find the right people to communicate your needs to. And then from that, if in the response, say tribal leadership comes back and says, we don't know how to do this, then you can reach back and we can help you get connected to the right people who know stuff to be able to come back to tribal leadership and help walk them forward. And through the combination between the OVWTA, our focus is on the systems advocacy work to support you in that process. and to help you connect to your resources. So then it reaches a point where it starts getting out of our scope. So we'll connect you to the right people so that then you can keep moving it forward within your own work as well as your community needs and whatever people are asking for.
And I kind of think as a good follow-up to what you just said, Vicki, and what Zoe was saying earlier is usually our housing authorities are a primary player in these kinds of projects, but the Salish and Kootenai project that we were using, in all fairness, their staff was wonderful in helping on the development side, but in the end, they were not the owner and they really weren't the developer. They were a voucher provider. Their staff provided invaluable assistance during the planning phase of the project, but their role at the end was as a voucher provider to provide additional rental assistance for these families that would qualify under their program. And if you look at a lot of these funding sources, I think, and I'm sure that Zoe would agree, there in the example you just gave of the CDC, there are a lot of creative ways that different groups can access these available funding sources that we currently have to accomplish the goals that all of you have. You shouldn't be afraid of the structure. If it doesn't work one way, then the next obvious question should be, well, what if we did this? What if we did this? And you're right, Vicki, it helps when you have a lot of people sitting around the table who are, I like to say, out of the box thinkers, because none of us live in a world usually where these funding sources fit in a box for us. We are always finding creative ways. Zoe keeps me awake late at night sometimes with the creative plan she has come up with for housing funding sources. So don't ever think something is not possible. Ask, and maybe the way you're visualizing it might not work, but hopefully somebody will be at your table that will say, you know what, we couldn't do it this way, but we could do it this way. So will that work for you guys? Because we could make that work. And we spend a great deal of time on all of our projects doing exactly that.
So I'm going to put into the chat, since we're talking so much about partnerships, we don't want you to wait on starting to build these partnerships because the clock is ticking on this money. But we do have a conference coming up in May 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th. They're half days because they're virtual. We don't want you sitting in front of your computer for 8 hours for a conference, but they're 4 hours a day. And it is about a housing and advocate response team. And so it is about building this partnership between advocates and housing authorities or tribally designated housing entities, and how to create them, maintain them, work through challenges, but definitely don't wait to attend this conference before you start doing that. Please, like, start building those partnerships right away because this is super important. But we'd also love for you to come to the conference.
And I will just say personally, if you know, I think we're all saying that we're as available as you need us to be, and that we realize this is a time sensitive thing. And so if there's you know, if there's if you start the conversation with your housing authority or your tribe and they're like, what are you talking about? Because they haven't even gotten the money yet. You know, I think we're all, I'll speak for myself. I'd be happy to jump on a clarifying call. I'm better on the phone than in writing because this stuff is too complicated to try and write out. But I think for me, and I feel like, you know, we've all been talking about like how much we want to just make sure this money does not go back to the federal government and it gets spent on programs that have been needed for so long.
Vicki, this is Sherry Ann. Hi. Thank you. You're muted. Thank you for putting this on. I think this is such a, for those of you on the call, I'm the Deputy Director of the Tribal Affairs Division in the Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women. And I can't tell you how many times I've been approached by tribal leaders wanting to put up a shelter, especially those in the rural areas that are very rural and remote. And you know, having to have the conversation that the funding you get from OVW can't be used for construction, renovation, or those types of things. When I heard of this opportunity, I thought, I thought, what a great opportunity for our programs to work with the tribes or their nonprofit housing authorities to approach them with a plan to say, hey, we have the operating money through our grant program. You build the facility, and that partnering will have a shelter for our victims. I mean, it sounds simple, but it may be. I'm listening to your presentation. You've done some great work, and I appreciate Wyanet and Zoe saying the time is now, because it really is to get moving on this and approach tribes with an idea. Approach tribal leaders, and how can we help at OVW, Vicki, working together with you to reach out directly to more tribal leaders with these ideas, especially the ones that are getting the money. Interestingly, I looked on the list, there was only one, the Sitka tribe from Alaska on the list. And, Alaska has a great need for shelters and safe homes. And so I'm not sure if how was this money appropriated or allocated to the tribes? And I just, what can we do? This is really an exciting opportunity, and I want to work with you more to help put people together with the tribal leaders, especially those that I've heard directly from that want a shelter.
Thanks for that offer, Sherry Ann. That's really great. And we actually have already started strategizing on follow-up. So there's follow-up for the people that have attended this session that we want to do to make sure that they feel comfortable reaching out. We're communicating to make sure that they know how to get the support and resources to start making some moves. And then for those that aren't on the call, yesterday, Wyanet and I were having a conversation about some strategies of doing some more reach out, because we basically see we've got anywhere between a 1 to 3 month window to start getting in line for these resources. And when I think about advocates and historically the work that we have done and the work within Title IX and in VAWA, that it's really been the leadership of our advocates being great organizers and speaking on the needs of the victims. And so, really starting to think about how do we mobilize the advocates to really start making these asks. And we've talked about doing other sessions as well. So that's just like an end of the workday conversation we had yesterday. And we know we're going to continue talking about this because we're really in a critical time right now. And actually, I was on another call, a TA call, just a little bit before this one, and even said this is like a unicorn moment, like the housing unicorn showed up. And we need to make sure like we're engaging with that unicorn and getting the best opportunities out of it. And thanks for that, Sherry Ann. We'll definitely reach back to OVW and see what we can do.
Yeah, this is just fabulous. I know, we have consultation where we pull, hundreds. Last year we had 649 registered attendees, but that's not until August. And I know, we need to get moving on this now. So whatever I can do to work with you and help, we'll do it.
Definitely. Thank you.
And can I just ask you said at one point that the only group in Alaska that got money was Sitka, but do you know which money you were talking about, or did I hear that wrong?
I looked on the list that there was a list that we received. I think it came from Vicki, of all the tribes that received the funds from the Treasury.
That was the Treasury funds. And so on there, they listed also, Alaska got quite a large chunk, and I did send information to Tammy Giroux about it, because they did list the tribal housing authorities, or they have consortiums that they have put together. And so money was coming in that way for them as well.
But it may have gone to the corporations then.
Yes.
Okay, great.
And that's just one pot too. So Vicki, did I send you the IHBG, the Indian Housing Block Grant amounts that each tribe got?
I can't remember. There were
I'll
so many
resend
things
it.
coming and trying to sort it between this and the conference.
I know, I'm
It's
sorry.
been a lot all of a sudden in a short time, but we will definitely collect different resources, and we'll send up a follow-up email to everybody based on the links and stuff that Wyanet was saying. And then we'll look at getting you the list, because I do think it would be helpful to have the list of the Treasury Act funds or the Treasury funds, as well as the other resources that are out there that distributes how it's coming into the tribes and into your area. So if you don't get it in the first email, you'll get it in the second. And we'll get that out to you as well.
Okay, great. One of the things we did recently in March, we did an outreach blast on our tribal government's grant program. And we reached out and made connection with all of the 12 regions and the tribal organizations across the nation. And it was real quick in less than a week. And we had great response to that from, the tribes and the tribal leaders in those regions. And, just something like that. I'm just thinking, how can we get directly to the tribal leaders themselves that are interested in the work that we do in OVW and the need for shelters and for victims and survivors in this regard, and get a chunk of that money, even for tribes who already have shelters. Oftentimes there are shelters that we're already providing operating funds for, but they want to expand, or they want to do new things. They want to, renovate and put in better security systems and, things like that. Things for kids, those that have places for kid moms and their children. And we can't do it because we can't use our funds for that. So, there's a lot of different ways, big and small, that can help a lot of tribes.
That's a great idea. And I think your emails have more weight than our emails.
I mean, for example, one tribe has a shelter, and they have moms and children, and they wanted to put up a big security fence around so they could have a safe place for the kids to go out and play, and we couldn't approve it because we can't approve that type of thing with our money. So there's things like that, little things that would go a long way. Okay, this is really a great opportunity. If you can't hear it in my voice.
Yes, thanks, Sherry Ann. That's really great.
Thank you.
It's about time there's a great opportunity, right? It's been a long, long time.
Absolutely.
Yes. What a
was-
relief, huh, to have this opportunity right now.
I was just going through the list, Vicki, and I'm looking based on what Sherry was saying. And I think one of the good things for everybody to remember is that there's money available through so many different government agencies. It's not just Treasury. There's BIA, there's IHS, there's HHS, there's find all that. And just for the things like what you were just speaking about, as far as having assistance to build a better security fence. The BIA money is, its explanation for that is exactly, has public safety and protection aspects to it. So the problem that we have is, and maybe it's a good problem to have, guys, is some of these programs have not yet rolled out how they're going to make this money accessible. We know it's there, and you need it. It's time to send a letter to the folks at BIA and say, listen, you have this money, I have this need, let's make that happen. Maybe you help form the program that they're eventually going to adopt for how the money is utilized. We're at that much of a beginning here with these funding sources. I mean, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program is just now being rolled out across the country. It's complicated, and it took the state housing agencies time to figure it out. It took the tribes time to figure it out. I haven't seen anything from the BIA on their additional money. And I know that IHS can be a complicated system, but they have had a lot of money between the CARES Act money from the end of last year and this new round of funding. We need to make sure that we're accessing those funding sources as well.
Yeah, I mean, imagine what we could do if all the federal agencies that had a common purpose with these resources came together and collaborated and worked together instead of trying to piecemeal it, you know.
I think we might call that a whole herd of unicorns, right, Vicki?
And isn't that cool? We got a herd.
I passed out while he was driving and noticed that his car was scraping against the guardrail on the side.
So I do want to remind folks that we're going to have a Q&A session tomorrow as well at noon. And Wyanet just dropped the link in the chat. So Wyanet, did you have any other things you wanted to say?
Just that we're here for TA. That's what we do. We're here to enhance your work. We're here to help you brainstorm. We're kind of your team across the country. So definitely feel free to come to the Q&A session, but we're here all the time. No questions too big or too small, and we don't claim to know everything either. That's why we have partnerships too. So we can link you up to the people who know things that we don't know. That's, you know, I'm a strong believer in synergy, that we're better together. So feel free to reach out and feel free to come tomorrow. Think about questions tonight.
And I will just say for tomorrow, so we will have somebody from HUD, Office of Native American Programs there. So she can, and she's great, and she can answer a lot of probably the stuff about the HUD money. You know, like none of us on this have read all the regulations yet because it's like 14,000 pages thick, and none of us, we all love it. We like ourselves too much to have to try and read all that. So just, you know, just wanted to give a little disclaimer on that, but we can certainly answer questions about processes. We can answer questions about what we know of as eligible uses for these funds, especially the HUD and the Treasury Act and the Violence Against Women. I'm not going to say that acronym right. Those are probably, but just wanted to just share that as people are thinking about what kind of questions. We will have the HUD person there, and just none of us are lawyers, so we wouldn't understand the regs if we did read them. But that's what you have, that we can talk about how you work with your tribe's legal department, like we did at Salish Kootenai, to get through that.
Well, great. I hope to see you join us tomorrow, and reach back out, and we'll reach out to you, and we'll just keep this conversation going, and find ways to support you as you make your steps forward, engaged with your system's advocacy response to meet the needs of survivors within your community. And I'm just so grateful for our partnership with Robin and Zoe, to be able to bring their expertise to share their knowledge and experience with you all as well. So we'll just keep in touch and keep on talking. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Real quick, before we end this session, I want to remind everyone that the Q&A tomorrow will be an hour earlier at 12 p.m. MST. So that'll be an hour earlier than today. The recording of this webinar will be uploaded onto Redwind's YouTube channel, which you can reach either directly through YouTube or via our website, which is red-wind.net. I'd like to thank all of our presenters today, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. I hope you all stay safe, and I hope to see you all at our future webinars.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.